Hello, hello. This is Kim Addis from Frame of Mind Coaching, and you have just joined us at the Frame of Mind Coaching podcast. Today, my guest is one of our very own coaches, Taylor Jobe, all the way from California. Taylor, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Actually, welcome back.
Yes. It's good to be back.
Yeah, we had such a good time last time that I thought, you know what, we should definitely have Taylor back.
Amen.
So first of all, just to let everybody know, you're almost about to have your third child.
That's right. Number 3 coming up here.
Holy smokes. What were you thinking?
It just happens, you know?
It happens.
Some of these things just happen. So,
okay, well, we're excited for you, and we look forward to all the tales and adventures of fatherhood with 3 when they start outnumbering you.
Yeah, it's definitely crossing a line for sure.
That's good. Okay, well, so I want to talk about something interesting today, something that we've never really spoken about, and something that has actually played a massive role in my life that I have never, ever actually spoken to anybody really about. Like,
Okay.
It hasn't come up in our coaching or anything. And what that is the power or the influence, the impact of physiology on decision making. So I just want to give you a little bit of history. For me, ever since I was a kid, my body reacted and still does to certain events, certain moments, certain experiences. So I'll give you some examples. When I was a child, I remember, so my sister is 15 years older than me, and I remember I was 10 years old and they made an announcement that she was pregnant. And at the time, I kind of sort of understood how pregnancy happens. And I was deeply affected, like so badly that I got sick. And I had to stay home because it made me literally have nausea, diarrhea, etc. Got sick hearing that news until I finally got comfortable with it and moved along. Another example was one day I was driving along the street to with my brother, and he was taking me over to stay at my sister's for the night. And as he was turning left, something happened. There was a car, the car wasn't moving. So my brother kind of went in front of the car. That car sped up and made us stop and got into a fight, wanted to get into a physical fight with my brother. And I was little. I was, again, I think in the 10-year-old range. And I remember freaking out physically and getting sick. I'll give you another example now as I am older. So this is not so long ago. My son was a baby. We were sitting in a restaurant. It was Christmas time. And it was like a Sunday. We were out for brunch with a friend of mine who came in from out of town. And not too far from our booth, like literally within eyesight, was another family. There was a husband and a wife, 2 kids, and what looked like grandparents. And I looked over, and all of a sudden, like one of the kids, the daughter, was like hanging over the father's shoulder. He literally elbowed her, like, and threw her off of him. And to me, it looked like a very, very rough, aggressive, mean, hurtful experience. And I remember my body freezing, and inside I started to shake. So what do you think all that means? I know, again, we haven't really discussed it, but for me, my body talks. My body tells me things. My body tells me what to pay attention to. So the question is, am I paying attention to the crappy things, the bad stuff, the negative things, or is that useful information that I should pay attention to?
Well, it's funny that you say, are you paying attention to the negative, bad, crappy things? Because part of it is you probably don't notice when things are going well, right?
Well, that's interesting, yeah. So
because when things are, it's like when you're sick, all you want is to feel better. It's all you can think about. Well, I want to get better. I want to get better. And the morning you wake up that you feel better, you go, oh my gosh, I'm back. This is it. This is the greatest day of my life. And by the end of that day, you've completely forgotten that you feel better. Better. So maybe that's part of why it stands out. I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. And so really the question is that like your gut talking? So for me personally, like, again, there are lots of similar experiences to that. And those experiences uh, left a mark. So I'm
Right.
able to go back to those moments and remember them, right?
Right.
There are so many moments we've had in our lives that just go by that we don't remember. But there are moments when, for me, my physiology was engaged that left an indelible mark. So
Sure.
what was the pattern of this? What was this really trying to tell me? Over time, I've started to understand, like, each time, like, in my early stage, I was young, I was the kid. But as I got older, these physiological reactions always happen when I was watching a child engaging with an adult in a way that didn't sit well with me.
Hmm. Hmm.
Right?
Yeah, I think in terms of awareness and being aware of what's going on, it certainly is relevant. I mean, when you're hungry, your body still sends you signals, and we interpret that as information. When we're tired, right? It's trying to tell us something. So, you know, for me, the one that stands out as you're saying that is I recall in college, I remember my mom sent me some advertisements or things about studying abroad, and I didn't do it. I was in a great spot. I had great friends. I was like, why would I leave this? And then as soon as I graduated and started working, and I thought about living abroad, I got that, you know, pit in the stomach feeling, right? I just felt
Right.
this knot, just bam, just firmed up. And I paid attention to it too, kind of like you're saying. And I remember thinking, well, that's it. What is that? Why is that happening? Why am I? It was a physical manifestation of some feeling of regret, because not that I didn't do it, but that I felt that I wouldn't ever get a chance to do it again. And for me, paying attention to that actually was a big part of, I was living in Los Angeles at the time, a big part of what helped me look at that feedback loop of regret, my body noticing it at some level deeper than I was willing to consciously consider it. And I remember thinking, I don't want to feel that again. And so that's part of what motivated me or helped me clean up my game plan to actually move to New York, for example, was
Right.
I thought, I don't want to watch a movie about New York, you know, 40 years from now and think, oh, I thought about doing that, because I could see that I was going to have that feeling again, that pit of the stomach knot. I thought, I don't want to do that. I'd rather go have a terrible experience, have the movie play, and say, I went and it was terrible. I'm never going back.
Right. So something not to regret later on in life.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, I've also had experiences, especially as I was younger. I don't know if you ever had them, but I remember, like, being in grade 7 and they said, okay, you have to do a speech, right? And so you would prepare the speech, memorize the speech, and right before the speech, I would get a terrible stomach ache. And there was no way that I could go do the speech without spending at least 20 minutes in the washroom first. Like,
Sure.
I was terrified, nervous. And that actually kept happening to me until well into my adulthood. Like, I do a lot of speaking, but I still, for a long time, got that stomach ache before going out on stage. And so really what I want to bring to the conversation today is, what does our physiology tell us? Does it tell us to be cautious, to be careful, to stay away? Is that an instinct that says, oh, there's something, you know, dangerous that we should stay away from? Sometimes, you know, when we interact with people who aren't, let's say, behaving in ways that make us feel comfortable, we get that physiological reaction that says, be careful, stay away from those people. Or sometimes it tells us, hey, there's an opportunity here and my body's telling me that I should tune into it. How do we know? How could we know? Is there an indicator?
Yeah, I think, well, so, you know,
Again, we're
I never answer questions directly, right? But
we're
here's my
venturing.
thinking is, yeah, so I'm interested in how that feeling went away for you in terms of speaking, because my hunch is it used to feel nervous when you get sick, but now I have a feeling you've sort of turned that into focus and energy, right? Giving you energy going up there. And so part of it is this question of, when you observe something, you're aware of it, don't, you know, jumping to a conclusion. Meaning, when you got that anxiety of the butterflies, were you thinking like, well, this is bad, this is scary, something bad is going to happen to me?
I'll tell you, yeah, I'll tell you my personal and very, very honest truth is that for many years, even as I was running this company, I would be like, yeah, I can speak. I'm a good speaker. I'm an impactful speaker, but I don't like speaking because
Right.
I hate that feeling. I hate that feeling beforehand. And I hate the feeling of being on stage and being evaluated, you could say.
Right.
So obviously now I speak even more. I speak more than ever. So I've ramped up my speaking instead of scaled it back.
Right.
People would say, I don't understand. Like, you do speak and you're an effective speaker, you're a
Right.
powerful speaker. You know, there's like something that's not adding up. And what I
Right.
realized for myself is that the way that I was positioning my speaking, the way that I was determining what it meant for me, about me, created a lot of stress, fear, tension.
Right.
And so what happened for me is I started to think, hey, why am I speaking? I'm not speaking so that I get positive accolades. That's not why I'm speaking. I'm speaking to literally uh, be of service. In other words, to give something. I'm there to love the audience. I'm there to give something to the audience. I'm there to share with the audience. I'm there to help the audience. If there's somebody there who needs anything from me, I'm there to give it. So I started to transform my experience by understanding that I'm just here to give anything that I have to give. So
Right.
what that did was I didn't take that nervous energy and turn it into like excitement. Okay, like now I'm on stage, rah, rah, rah. No, the opposite happens. I get to a very calm, peaceful place before I go on stage. And so
Right.
because it removes my need to perform, that whole idea of performance, you know, is it a good performance, bad performance? That whole idea of performance created a problem for me. So now I'm not performing. I'm going on stage. I'm teaching what I know, and I'm giving whatever it is that I have to give. Right. So, and
Yeah,
that's
yeah. No, I hear you. You said two things in there. One was you changed the meaning of it, of why you're presenting. Because at
yeah,
first you thought, I'm afraid of, you did two things there, right? At first you said, I'm afraid of presenting, but then you snuck in, I'm actually afraid of being judged
right.
about
I
my
don't,
speaking.
I don't like the feeling. Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. And so the focusing on the judgment, in which case, the fear was of the judgment more so than of the speaking, and so you changed the meaning of it, right?
Right.
You changed the meaning of it to say, no, this is an opportunity to have an impact, to serve, to whatever. And so it's this. When you asked me previously, is your physiology an indicator of something? I would say yes, but you also might be able to pick what it means. It's just the same thing when you look at a thought
Yes.
or a belief, and we go, well, is it good or is it bad? Well, we're jumping to a conclusion now. We're jumping to judgment instead of curiosity, right? And so I think if you can engage your physiology like it sounds like you did as a data point and get curious about it, why is it doing this, instead of, well, what does this mean about me? What does
Right.
this say about me? Which is, I think, our natural place to go. It can be very powerful and very informative,
Right.
for sure.
So, and if it's about others, what do I believe to be true about this person, this situation, etc.? So one of the things that happened for me, and I think it's interesting because we've been talking a lot about this subject, is the subject of parenting. And I noticed that like I get emotionally engaged, charged, like heart beating, blood pressure going up when I see children being treated poorly.
Right.
Like all of a sudden, that's my cause. Like I need to get involved, even if I'm terrified. So in the case of being at the restaurant and seeing that guy, you know, elbowing, what ended up happening was like I couldn't stop watching. I was just like, my eyes were peeled on this situation. And this father caught my glimpse, like he caught me watching him.
Mm-hmm.
And I looked at him and I said, don't do that. Be nice. Like that's what came out of me. And he said, it's none of your business, right? He swore at me. And my heart was like just jumping out of my sleeve. And I went
Right.
home, and at the time, it was a long time ago, my husband was like, what are you doing? Why are you getting involved? Like you could have gotten beaten up and you know, whatever, but I couldn't help myself. And I kept thinking about the situation like for days after. I still think about it now, to be honest. And I'm like, why didn't anyone else speak up? Why didn't anyone else come to her rescue? Why was that okay? Why is that father allowed to treat the daughter that way? And why did he talk to me that way? Right. And on and on and on.
Right,
Why did I
right.
speak up? And why is this important to me? But I realized like over the years, this is an important subject for me. It's an
Sure.
important subject for me as a parent, and it's also an important subject for me as the coach who happens to interact with a lot of parents, even though they come for, as you know, executive professional coaching, they always end up talking about their kids. So it's like a hot, really
Right.
important subject for me. So,
Right.
so what I'm really kind of getting back at is you're right. Your physiology is telling you something. The question is, how do we interpret what it's telling us? Is your physiology saying, hey, there's an opportunity here that you need to pay attention to, that you need to take? Or, hey, there's a belief about this situation that isn't serving you. Like, I could be afraid of someone who could be the most amazing person, but I would stay away because my belief says that person's dangerous, or they're
Sure.
doing things that cause me to feel uncomfortable. And yet, really, that person is exposing me to new things. Or alternatively, it could tell me there is something, in fact, dangerous going on that I need to be cautious about.
Right. Yeah, I think where they lead us astray is when we get too emotionally wrapped up in it, and we aren't thinking clearly enough to. You just rattled off a bunch of different options of what it could be.
Yeah.
And when we're stressed or we're in the moment, you don't. You just go to the worst option because it's the safest and you assume that one. So even what you're saying, to be able to get curious about what that emotion or feeling is, you do need to be able to, and it's a skill, I think, build up the capacity to dial back a bit. Don't jump straight to what does this mean, right? Observe it and then ask questions, get curious before jumping to what is this an indicator of.
So you said something very interesting, and I want to kind of expand on that, is the word emotion. Okay, so usually when we have an emotion, whatever that emotion is, we think, well, like I feel a certain way. And so therefore that's the way it is. That's the way it must be. I need to just like that emotion leads. But at Frame Mind Coaching, when someone has an emotion, it's an indicator, it's a guidepost. You could say a sign that says, I have thoughts, I have beliefs about what's going on, or this person or this situation that's causing me to feel a certain way. By the same token, when we have an emotional reaction, it's kind of like having an emotion,
Right.
maybe at an accelerated level. And when we have that physiological reaction, we also want to go back and say, what are the beliefs that are causing this emotional reaction?
Yeah. And I think the break point is catch yourself jumping into what does this mean about me? That's the part that makes it a dangerous feedback loop. And so for you with the speaking, once you were able to say, this doesn't have to say anything about me as a person, right? It doesn't. That's what opened you up to new opportunities. And so I think that's a trap. I think in coaching, we see people get caught in all the time, is they have an emotion or some outcome, and they immediately jump to the judgment of, what does this mean about me? What does this say about me?
Right. And that applies to everything. It applies to when we run our businesses, when we run our teams, and maybe our business isn't performing as well this month or last month or whatever. What does it mean about me? Right? Does it mean I'm a bad leader? Does it mean that I'm not effective? Does it mean that I dropped the ball? Does it mean I don't have my eye on the bottom line? And on and on and on. We assign meaning to everything.
Right. Right. Yeah. And emotionally, so go back to where you started and you said, are all these physiological things all negative? Well, if you talk about negative emotions, that's some category of pain, right? Like you could lump them all up under this is pain or suffering or something like that. And we think that emotional pain is different than physical pain. Like we treat emotional pain way differently than physical pain for the most part, because if you go fall off your bike and break your leg and you've got a pain in your leg, you generally don't end up, on the therapist's couch. You end up in the hospital because you go to a doctor and you say, let's get some information, right?
Yeah.
Let's take a look at it. Let's see what's going on. And then the doctor actually doesn't fix it. All right. The doctor just looks at it, observes it, and it creates the conditions for it to heal itself. Right? The doctor doesn't go in and yell at the bone, and nobody gets upset about that, right? You set the conditions, you put a cast, you say, don't touch it, just sit with it for a bit, be with it, and let it work itself out. Stop screwing with it, stop hitting it, right?
Right.
But for emotional pain, we treat it totally differently for whatever reason, right? It's a threat. And what does it say about me? And how am I ever going to be successful in the world if I can't, get comfortable going up on stage, right? And I don't know why, but we treat them as two very different things,
Right.
but they aren't necessarily, to your point, because the emotional pain shows up physiologically most of the time.
Yes. So there's two ideas there that I think are very important. Number one is emotional pain does show up physiologically, right? Like we have a headache. Where does that come from? Our shoulders are tense. Where does that come from? We have a stomach ache. Where does that come from? Whatever, so we carry our emotions in our body. And so sometimes our body is telling us that our emotions, our thinking, our beliefs are not really lined up with the direction we want to go in. So our body is telling us, hey, there's something we really need to pay attention to. But you also said something else that's very interesting. And that is that when we have a physical pain, we try to fix the physical pain. When we have an emotional pain, very often our reaction is to create a deeper emotional hole, right? So to beat ourselves up and to make that emotional pain worse than it already is. Like, you shouldn't feel that way. I shouldn't feel that way. Or I feel that way and I can't get out and I'm stuck and I have no options. Both of those strategies create a bigger emotional pain.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like if you broke your calf or you broke your foot and you started thinking, how am I ever gonna get back to work? I'm never gonna walk. And you just got up and said, I should be able to walk. I need to be able to walk. You just get up and stand on your broken foot. It's gonna get worse.
Right.
We just know that physically. So you don't.
Right.
You give yourself a break. You take some weight off it.
Yeah.
You sit down and you come up with a game plan.
Right. And if we even take a step back and say, how does that apply to relationships? How often are people in unhealthy relationships? They end those unhealthy relationships without really addressing the source or the cause of those unhealthy relationships, and then jumping into a new relationship that gets itself to the same unhealthy place.
Right.
The same idea.
Right.
Right. Yeah, it's really, really interesting.
Yeah.
As a dad, I remember when my kids were young, and let's say, I remember one time my son was standing on the counter and he fell and hit his head. My body just totally reacted. I felt my heart in my throat, and I was just a state of panic. Has that ever happened to you?
Right. Yeah, no, absolutely. And I was trying to sort of think about what that means, and all this physiological response. Yeah, it's saying that this matters to me.
Yeah.
Fundamentally, what it's saying and why you had that response. So for me, it was experiencing living in another country or in a different world is really what it ended up being from where I grew up. For you, it's being a good parent, right? It's for as parents, it's anything bad happening to our kids is not what we want, right? So yeah, I think it's a huge signal of this is what matters to me.
This is what matters, and I have no control over this, right? It's that piece of this is out of my hands, but I desperately need to regain control, even though it's not in my control, right? And I think that's an interesting component of all this. It's, how does our body react when the world around us is functioning the way it does and it's not in our hands? And we desperately want it to be in our hands. We desperately want to have control. Sometimes that's the trigger for stress, for illness, for headaches, for heartaches, heartburn, whatever, all of that.
Why do you think we so desperately want control?
Because it makes us feel safer. It gives us the illusion of safety, the illusion that things are relaxed and peaceful, and that we can determine certain outcomes. Right?
So if I can keep in control of all this, nothing bad will happen.
Exactly. Again, another story related to kids is, I remember being in Jamaica, and I don't know if you've ever been in Jamaica, but there's this thing called the Dunn's River Falls. It's a very steep climb through water and rocks. So I was with my two kids, and I'm not as fast a climber as they are, but my daughter, who was, I think, 9 at the time, went up ahead of us. She got to the top of this, first of all, she's in rocky water. I'm already freaking out, right? She gets to the top. I finally get there too, and she's nowhere to be found. Freak out,
Right.
right?
Right.
And so what do? I climb all the way back to the bottom. And again, like I'm like, right, like totally out of breath. I can't find my daughter. I'm asking for help. I climb all the way back up, not through the water this time, through, whatever, but super steep. I get to the top. I still can't find her. And it's like that moment where like, this is not in my hands. This is not in, like, I have
Right.
no control.
Right.
And it's the one thing that I desperately want to have control over. I want to know she's safe. I want to have her beside me. I want to see her. I want to hold her. I want to touch her, right? So that feeling of lack of control can set our bodies into a state of panic.
Mm-hmm. So
Like
what'd you do?
some people, what did I do? I yelled her name. I asked for help, and then suddenly someone brought her to me.
Uh-huh.
But it's a situation where we review that again. Physiological experiences leave imprints different from other experiences. So it's like an experience. Remember when, da, 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 da. Like now it's all funny and great, but it was not funny and great at the time at all. And,
Right.
all kinds of things come into mind. Like, oh my God, something terrible could have happened. How could you, like just go off without us? And, oh
Right.
my God, I'm so slow. Why didn't I go faster? Why didn't I hold her beside me? What kind of mother
Right.
am I? And on and on and on, right? All this chatter that goes into your brain.
Well, that's a pretty common one, right? With kids is, so when you find her, a common thing would be to be upset with her. Well, why'd you run off? You should have stayed with me. Blah, blah, blah. That's a pretty standard response, right? But what's behind all of those types of responses, I feel like, is what the second thing you said, which was like basically some version of, well, what does it say about me as a parent?
Yes. And
right? That's what's really
terrible
lurking.
Fear. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Right. And that's the harder one to see in those situations because it looks like she did this to you, but it's not. To use that was an excuse that you used to potentially judge yourself as a parent, right? Like in that context. And that's always lurking behind the scenes of, I mean, physiologically, I think one of the common ones is getting angry at somebody. I mean, that probably happens multiple times a day, and that's physiology. So there is this, it is a cue to say, okay, something that matters to me is happening. And I think it's happening in that person, but you wouldn't notice it in that person if it wasn't important to you. Like for you, all the examples of, let's just call it bad or irresponsible parenting, you noticed that. You didn't notice what the guy was wearing, right? Because that's not important to you in that context, right? So it's a really good signal or cue to say something important is happening, and what about this is important to me, and how am I judging myself based on it? Because that's really what you're doing.
Yeah. And if we go back to the guy who elbowed his daughter, was I strong enough or was I weak? I spoke up, but was that enough? Right. Like that poor little girl, maybe she needs a stronger advocate, right?
So how do we get comfortable with the reality that we really don't have much control?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, obviously we coach our clients to a great degree on this very issue, is what do you have control over and what don't you have control over? And I think a lot of the times our clients struggle because they try to have control over things that aren't in their control at all. Their employees, their spouses, their kids, the competition, sales, revenue sometimes, right? All of that stuff. So we have a false belief. We have this ideology that we can control. We can control all of these items. And when we realize that when it seems like we're failing, then we start beating ourselves up. So what we do when we coach people is we say, hey, here are the things you have control over. Everything else, we're taking it off your plate. So we're redefining your job, right? Your job title and your job duties are rebranded, you could say. And what do we do with our clients? We say you have control over three things. You have control over the way you think. You have control over what you believe, and you have control over what you think, how you feel, and how you behave, right? At the end of the day. And so we say, if you only took control over those things, your life would dramatically change. because then you would say, what am I using as my reason to feel bad?
Mm-hmm.
I'm using all those things that I'm trying to control that are not in my control. And if I could let go of that, my life gets lighter, easier, my relationships improve, and I'm at peace in moments when ultimately I have no control.
Right.
Right?
And I think those three things you mentioned, right? What I think, what I feel, and how I behave, or what I do, when those are out of alignment, I think that is a big trigger for the physiological things that you were talking about, right? And so that's what it's a sign of. Is it something about what I'm thinking or what I'm feeling or what I'm doing is out of whack here? Which one is it? And how do I sort of wind this back?
Yeah. And if we go one step further and we talk about like physical illness, that falls into that category too. So how is my physical illness a manifestation of being out of alignment with that, what I think, what I do, and how I feel?
Right.
Exactly that.
Right.
Ah, good conversation.
Cool. Yeah.
Cool. Taylor, anything else you want to add?
Thank you. No, this is always fun. Yeah.
Always fun.
Yeah.
Thank you for having this conversation with me. I've been thinking about it for a while, and I was saving it up for you. I have been thinking about this, so
cool.
Thank you for throwing it around, playing with it, figuring it out, helping bring clarity to a subject that I think a lot of people experience and don't really understand is their physiological reactions to situations, stressful or not.
Yeah, and you don't need to be afraid of them.
Yeah.
Right?
So Taylor is one of our very own Frame of Mind coaches. He's awesome. He's amazing. And we invite anyone who's listening to learn more about Frame of Mind coaching by checking us out. Come to frameofmindcoaching.com. Listen to the other podcasts, read some articles, look at our testimonials, and just find out more about what we do and how we do it. So thank you for listening. Thank you, Taylor, for joining me. And until we meet again.
Thanks, Kim. Have a good one.